You think you choose your relationships. You believe you decide who you're attracted to, who you love, who you reject, who fascinates you and who just gets under your skin. You're wrong. Dead wrong. Carl Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, and he stumbled upon something disturbing, something that fundamentally reshapes how we perceive our connections with others. He discovered that there's something living inside of you, something you're completely unaware of, something you have absolutely no control over, and this something is secretly calling the shots in your entire love life. Jung called it the shadow, and the shadow is the one deciding your relationships, not you. It is Andrew Huberman, the acclaimed neuroscience professor over at Stanford. He actually validated this from a scientific perspective. He brought Dr. Alan Shaw onto his podcast for a mind-blowing conversation, and what Shaw revealed will probably shock you. 90 to 95% of what drives us is unconscious. Read that again. Let it sink in. 90 to 95%. That means when you look at someone and you feel that instant electric pull, when you meet someone and it's like you've known them your whole life, when you fall head over heels for someone who later turns out to be toxic. You weren't choosing, your shadow was, and it has its own reasons that you're not privy to. Agendas that you wouldn't endorse, needs that you'd rather not even admit to. Jung described the shadow as the unconscious part of the personality, containing all the aspects of ourselves that we reject or suppress. These are the qualities deemed unacceptable by society, by our families, or even by our own conscious ego. But just because you reject something doesn't mean it vanishes into thin air. It just means it goes underground, and from the shadows, it continues to operate. It projects. It attracts. It repels. It weaves patterns that you unconsciously repeat, without even knowing why. Ever wonder why you always end up with the same type of person? Why? Even when you swear things will be different this time, history just seems to repeat itself. Why you attract narcissists, or emotionally unavailable partners, or people who constantly need rescuing? The answer isn't out there. It's in your shadow. Huberman breaks down the neurological mechanism behind all of this. The right brain. In humans, it develops first. This critical development phase happens from the last trimester of pregnancy, all the way through the first 2 to 3 years of life. And this development, it largely shapes our emotional regulation and our attachment patterns. In other words, even before you have language, before you have conscious memory, your brain is already being programmed for certain types of relationships. And this programming, it happens in the right hemisphere, the same hemisphere that processes emotions, the same hemisphere that operates below the surface of consciousness, the same hemisphere that Jung would associate with the shadow. The right brain is constantly processing information, especially emotional information, at levels beneath conscious awareness. You don't realize it's happening, but it's happening all the time. Every single time you meet someone new, your right brain is scanning, comparing, searching for familiar patterns, and familiar to the brain doesn't mean good. It just means known. If you grew up with a father who was emotionally distant, your brain will recognize emotional distance as love. If your mother was hypercritical, you might mistake criticism for caring. If your childhood was chaotic, you might interpret stability as boring. And all of this happens entirely outside of your awareness. Your shadow is in control. Jung explained that projection is the unconscious process of attributing your own unrecognized qualities to another person. You're not seeing the real person. You're seeing a mirror, reflecting the parts of yourself that you can't accept. This works in 2 ways. Positive projection happens when you're drawn to someone, because they embody qualities that you admire but haven't fully developed within yourself. You see in them what you wish you could be, and you mistake that for love. Negative projection happens when you feel intensely irritated by traits in another person that actually mirror your own hidden flaws. Someone who unconsciously fears their own anger might project that anger onto their partner, perceiving them as excessively aggressive or hostile, even when that's not objectively the case. In both scenarios, you're not seeing the person, you're seeing your shadow. And this explains why relationships often start with such intensity and then, ultimately, crumble. In the beginning, you're in love with your own projection, with the image you've superimposed onto the real person, with the fantasy that your shadow has concocted. But real people can't maintain projections forever. Eventually, the mask slips, the real person emerges, and you feel betrayed. Because the person isn't who you thought they were. But they never were who you thought. You never truly saw them. You only saw your shadow, reflected back at you. Huberman and Dr. Shaw explain that there are 4 primary attachment styles: secure, avoidant, anxious, and disorganized. And these styles, they're formed in those critical early years, long before you have any conscious control over them. And here's the real kicker, the most impactful part of their discovery: the same circuits and mechanisms that are used to establish infant-mother attachment are repurposed later in life for adult relationships. You're not choosing partners as an adult. You're repeating patterns that were hardwired when you were a baby. Your shadow contains those patterns. It guards them fiercely, and it executes them automatically every time you enter a relationship. Jung wrote that if awareness of shadow projections remains suppressed, the creative factor of projection, the archetype of the shadow, has a free hand and can realize its object or bring about some other situation characteristic of its power. In simpler terms, if you're not aware of your shadow, it controls you. It chooses your partners. It creates your conflicts. It determines whether you'll have healthy relationships or destructive ones. And you might not even know that it exists. The risk of the shadow is that it projects unconsciously. This means it can infiltrate your thoughts and your actions without you even realizing it. You might become defensive. You might protest too much about something you actually crave internally. You might lash out at people. Or you might use your ego to generate stories that validate the needs of your ID. All of this happens automatically. All of this happens without your permission. All of this happens because you're completely in the dark about what lives within your shadow. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine a woman who grew up with a father struggling with alcohol. He was charismatic when sober, full of promises, full of charm, but unpredictable, emotionally unavailable, capable of great love and great cruelty. This young girl learns early on that love and unpredictability are connected, that intense emotional experiences are normal, that broken promises are part of the package. She grows up, goes to therapy, works on herself, swears she will never get involved with someone like her father struggling with alcohol. And then she meets a man. He doesn't drink. He has a good job. He seems completely different from her father. But there's something about him, a certain emotional distance, a way of making grand promises and then disappearing, an unpredictability she can't consciously identify. Her conscious brain sees all the differences. Her shadow sees all the similarities, and the shadow wins. She falls in love. She gets married, and a few years later, she's living a different version of the same nightmare she swore she'd avoid. Not because she's unintelligent, not because she didn't try, but because her shadow recognized something familiar, something that her right brain associated with love long before she had words to describe it. And she was drawn to it like a magnet. Andrew Huberman explains that the autonomic nervous system, the part of our nervous system that controls reflexive breathing, heart rate, skin conductance, and pupil size, is likely a significant component of the subconscious or unconscious. That means your body knows things that your conscious mind doesn't. When you meet someone and feel butterflies in your stomach, or when your skin crawls, or when your heart races, that isn't necessarily love. It could be your shadow recognizing a familiar pattern. It could be your autonomic nervous system saying, "I know this. This is just like what I learned in childhood. This must be love." But familiar doesn't mean healthy, and recognition doesn't mean compatibility. So, what can you do? If 95% of your choices are unconscious, if your shadow is in control, if patterns installed in childhood are still running, is there hope? Carl Jung would say yes, and Andrew Huberman would confirm it. The key lies in making the unconscious conscious. Carl Jung had a famous saying about this. He said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most people live like this. They repeat patterns, attract the same types of people, live out the same dramas, and then they say it's fate, that there's no way out, that that's just the way things are. But it's not fate. It's unintegrated shadow. It's unexamined unconscious. It's unretracted projection. Dr. Alan Shaw explained on Andrew Huberman's podcast that childhood attachment patterns can be altered through specific protocols to improve adult relationships. Plasticity exists. The brain can change. You are not doomed to repeat the same mistakes forever. But change requires specific work that most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. Work that Carl Jung called confronting the shadow. The first step is to recognize that you have a shadow. This seems obvious, but it's not. Most people live in denial. They believe they are completely conscious of themselves, that they know their desires and their fears are their motivations. But if 95% is unconscious, then you only know 5% of yourself. The other 95% is in the shadow. The second step is to observe your projections. When you feel an intense emotional reaction to someone, positive or negative, there's probably a projection involved. The person is mirroring something in you, something you don't want to see, something your shadow hides. The irrational irritation you feel with certain people, projection. The obsessive fascination you feel for others, projection. The harsh judgment you make of specific behaviors, probably projection. Carl Jung used to say, "What you resist persists, and what you look at head-on transforms." Projection continues to operate while you avoid it, but the moment you recognize it, it begins to lose power. It's impossible to stop projecting completely because the psyche is alive, and as our conscious attitude changes, the unconscious reacts. But we can create a healthy relationship with our projections by understanding them as a message from the unconscious. Every projection is information. Every projection is showing you something about yourself. Every person who deeply irritates you is showing you a rejected part of yourself. Every person who fascinates you is showing you an undeveloped potential. Every relationship pattern you repeat is showing you an unhealed wound. The third step is to take responsibility. Retracting projections requires taking responsibility and realizing how often we act in exactly the ways we condemn. That person you judge for being controlling, you probably have a controlling part in yourself that you don't accept. That ex you criticize for being emotionally unavailable, you probably have areas of your life where you are also emotionally unavailable. That colleague you hate for being arrogant, you probably have an arrogant part that you suppress. This is difficult to accept. The ego resists violently, but it's the only way to integrate the shadow, to retract the projections, to finally see people as they are instead of distorted mirrors of yourself. Andrew Huberman explains that there is a lot of plasticity in the system, which means that it can change and rewire in response to experience. Just because someone may have had a less than stellar or even terrible social bond with a parent or caregiver as a child, that doesn't condemn them to having poor social bonds as an adult. But change requires experience. It requires new relationships that challenge the old patterns. It requires people who respond in ways different from those you're used to. It requires healthy co-regulation that teaches your nervous system new possibilities. Dr. Alan Shaw explains that the key to making changes in the patient is not what you do or say to the patient. It is how you are present with the patient, especially while that person is in a dysregulated state. That means that healing happens in relationship. The shadow was formed in the relationship with your primary caregivers, and it is healed in relationship, in connections that offer something different from what you received in childhood. But you need to be able to see these people, and to see them, you need to first retract the projections. Otherwise, you will continue to attract reflections of your shadow, people who mirror your wounds, partners who repeat the patterns of your parents, and the cycle will never stop. Jung observed something interesting about the digital age that applies perfectly to 2025. The curated perfection of online profiles creates a powerful incentive to suppress our imperfections. We're encouraged to present only the polished version of ourselves, to filter out anything that might be considered unacceptable. This constant editing pushes our authentic and imperfect self even further down into the unconscious. In other words, social media is fattening the shadow. The more you pretend to be perfect online, the more material goes into the shadow, and the more material in the shadow, the more projections. And more projections mean more distorted relationships. The digital age, with its echo chambers and algorithms, also amplifies our projections. We see our own shadow manifested in the behaviors and beliefs of others online, often leading to conflict and division. We're constantly being triggered, often without realizing where the trigger comes from within ourselves. That rage you feel when reading a stranger's comment online, it's probably not about the stranger. It's about something in your shadow that the comment activated. That fascination with influencers who seem to have perfect lives, projection of your own repressed desire to be seen and admired. That contempt for people who think differently than you, shadow projected, parts of yourself that you don't accept, externalized onto another group. The benefits of integrating the shadow are enormous. Integrating your shadow leads to a reduction in internal conflict, more authentic relationships, and a deeper understanding of human nature. When you know your shadow, you stop projecting so much. And when you stop projecting, you finally get to see people as they are. This changes everything. Suddenly, you can choose partners based on who they really are, not on who you imagine them to be. You can build relationships based on reality, not on fantasy. You can love real people, not projections, and that's liberating in a way that words can't describe. You stop living the same drama repeatedly. You stop attracting the same types of toxic people. You stop wondering, why does this always happen to me? Because you finally understand. It wasn't fate. It was the shadow. And now that you know it, it doesn't have the same power over you. Now, I want to give you a practical map to start this work. The first exercise is what Jung called trigger identification. For 1 week, pay attention to every time you have an intense emotional reaction to someone. It could be irritation, fascination, contempt, envy, excessive admiration. Write it down. Describe the person. Describe the behavior that provoked the reaction, and then ask yourself, where does this exist in me? In the beginning, your ego will resist. It will insist that the person really is irritating, or really is amazing, that it has nothing to do with you. But keep asking, where does this quality that irritates me exist in me in a repressed form? Where does this quality that I admire exist in me in an undeveloped form? The answers may take time to come, but when they do, they will be revealing. The second exercise is to review your past relationships. Make a list of all the significant relationships you've had, romantic, deep friendships, even notable enmities. Look for patterns. What types of people do you attract? Repeatedly? What types of conflicts appear in all of your relationships? What qualities do your partners tend to have in common? These patterns are signatures of your shadow. If you always attract people who need to be rescued, there's something in your shadow related to the need to be needed. If you always end up with emotionally unavailable people, there's something in your shadow related to your own emotional unavailability. The pattern does not lie. The third exercise is to observe your dreams. Jung was fascinated by dreams because they are direct messages from the unconscious. In dreams, the shadow often appears as disturbing figures, people who are chasing you, threatening strangers, distorted versions of people you know. Keep a dream journal, write down every dream you can remember, and then look for patterns. What figures appear repeatedly? What emotions dominate your dreams? What conflicts repeat night after night? These are clues about what lives in your shadow. Andrew Huberman talks about the importance of interoception, the ability to perceive the internal signals of your body. This ability is crucial for shadow work because the body often knows things before the conscious mind. When you meet someone new, pay attention to your body. Does your heart race? Does your breathing change? Do you feel tension somewhere specific? These bodily sensations are information. They are your autonomic nervous system responding to patterns it recognizes. They are your shadow communicating something. Learn to read these signals. They'll tell you much more than your conscious mind can perceive. The fourth exercise is to find a mirror. It could be a Jungian therapist. It could be a very honest friend. It could be an inner work group. The important thing is to have someone who knows you well enough to see your shadows. Someone who will tell you truths you don't want to hear. Someone who won't let you get away from the parts of yourself that you prefer to ignore. Jung said that no one can integrate the shadow alone. We need reflections. We need feedback. We need people who show us what we can't see. This is vulnerable and uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Dr. Alan Shaw emphasizes that healing happens in relationship, that the key isn't what you say to the patient, but how you are with the patient. This means that the relational context is more important than the techniques. Find people who can be with you in a different way. People who don't repeat the patterns of your childhood. People who respond to you in new ways. People who offer a type of connection you may have never experienced. These relationships are healing. They show your nervous system that other forms of connection are possible. They challenge the old patterns. They create new neural possibilities. The fifth exercise is the practice of active imagination. Jung developed this technique to dialogue directly with figures from the unconscious. You close your eyes, relax, and allow images to arise. Then, you interact with these images, ask questions, listen to answers. Treat the contents of the unconscious as real entities with their own wisdom. This may seem strange, but it works. During his own crises, Jung conversed with his visions. He asked them questions, he listened to the answers, and he emerged from those conversations with insights that revolutionized psychology. You can do the same. Visualize a figure that represents your shadow. It could be a dark version of yourself. It could be a menacing stranger. It could be any image that arises spontaneously. Then ask this figure what it wants, what it needs, what it's trying to show you, and listen. The answers might surprise you. Now, a crucial warning. This work isn't a quick fix. The shadow has been built over years, decades. It won't be integrated in a week or a month. This is a lifetime endeavor. But every step counts. Every recognized projection is power reclaimed. Every identified pattern is freedom gained. Every piece of shadow integrated makes a more authentic relationship possible. Jung described the shadow as individuation. The process of becoming whole is the work of a lifetime. There is no arrival. There is only a journey. But the journey is worth it. Because on the other side of this work, real relationships become possible. True love becomes possible. Authentic connection becomes possible. You stop attracting reflections of your shadow. You start attracting real people. And that changes everything. Huberman confirms that neuroplasticity exists throughout life. The brain can change. New patterns can be formed. Old programs can be rewritten. But change requires intention, requires attention, requires the uncomfortable work of looking at what you'd rather ignore. Jung wrote that one does not achieve enlightenment by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's a part of you waiting to be integrated. It contains your fears, yes, but it also contains your undeveloped talents, your repressed strengths, your unrealized potential. The golden shadow, as Jung called it, contains all the good in you that you can't accept, the creativity you're afraid to express, the power you're afraid to claim, the greatness you're afraid to face. Integrating the shadow isn't just about healing traumas. It's about reclaiming lost parts of yourself. It's about becoming whole. It's about finally living as the person you really are, instead of the fragmented version you present to the world. And when you become whole, your relationships transform, because you no longer need other people to complete you. You don't need to project your missing parts onto them. You can finally see them as they are, and love them for what they are. Not for who you imagine them to be, not for what they represent for your shadow, but for who they really are. That is true love, and it's only possible when you know what lives in your shadow. Jung proved it. Huberman confirmed it. And now you know. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you continue letting your shadow choose your relationships, or will you begin the work of reclaiming that power for yourself? The choice is yours. But remember, as long as you don't choose consciously, your shadow will choose for you. And it has its own reasons. Reasons you might not approve of. Reasons that could keep you stuck in the same patterns forever. The time to start is now. Your shadow is waiting to be known. And your future relationships depend on this choice. One final reflection before we finish. The era we live in makes shadow work more urgent than ever. Social media encourages us to build perfect personas, to show only our best side, to hide everything that's imperfect, vulnerable, human. This feeds the shadow. The more perfectly you present yourself online, the more material you push into the unconscious. And more material in the unconscious means more projections, more distorted relationships, more repetition of patterns. Algorithms put us in bubbles where we only see people who think like us. This amplifies shadow projection onto other groups. We see the others as enemies. We project onto them everything we don't want to see in ourselves. The polarization we see in the world is, in large part, shadow projection on a collective scale. Jung predicted this. He knew that entire societies can project their collective shadow onto scapegoats. That entire nations can act in monstrous ways because they haven't confronted the monster within. History has proven him right, and we're seeing it happen again. The only solution is individual. Each person who integrates their own shadow diminishes the collective shadow a little. Each person who withdraws their projections contributes to a less polarized world. Each person who becomes whole helps humanity become a little more whole. You can't change the world directly, but you can change yourself. And when you change yourself, you change all the relationships around you. And changed relationships create changed communities. And changed communities create changed societies. Everything starts with you, with your shadow. With the courage to look at what lives in the darkness, Jung spent his entire life doing this work. He descended into his own psychic hell, confronted his demons, dialogued with his voices, and emerged as one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. His ideas shaped not only psychology, but art, literature, spirituality, popular culture. All of this came from shadow work. All of this came from making the unconscious conscious. You have the same potential. I'm not saying you're going to become Jung. I'm saying you can become whole. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. Because when you become whole, you stop seeking in others what's missing in you. You stop projecting. You stop repeating patterns. You stop letting your shadow decide your relationships. And finally, for the first time, you can choose. Choose for real. with consciousness, with intention, with freedom. That's the gift that shadow work offers. That's the gift that Jung discovered. And now it's yours. If you have the courage to accept it,